Okay, so my first marriage. So with my first husband, I fell in love with my first husband pretty unexpected. Um, we used to work together. We were both in the Navy. We were both in supply. Shout out to supply, of course. We were both storekeepers. I don't know what they call it now. I think they call it logistics specialists or something like that. But shout out to supply. And we worked together. We became friends like immediately. And then we used to like hang out after work a lot. And I was young. I was only about 20 years old. I was fresh out of boot camp in A school. Guam was my first command. So I was still young. In the States, I wasn't even old enough to buy a drink. But in Guam, you only have to be 18 to be able to buy a drink. So I was considered a legal adult in the eyes of Guam. But I was only like 20 years old. And he was actually one of the funniest people that I ever met, at least for me. And let me put the disclaimer out there, because from my experience, just because I see or saw people a certain way doesn't mean it was mutual. I can only speak on my perspective, and sometimes my perspective of someone could be good and their perspective of me could be bad, I don't know, or vice versa. But for me, I thought he was one of the funniest people that I ever met, and a sense of humor for me is one of the top things that attracts me to somebody. If you have jokes, then that's just check number one. If you don't have any jokes, we can't even begin to kick it. That's just how I am. But for the most part, we fell for each other pretty fast, and we fell for each other pretty hard. And I lived on the ship at the time, and he didn't. So I didn't know where he went or what he was doing when he got off work. But the only thing I know is, like I said, we fell for each other pretty hard. We started out as friends, and the attraction just grew immediately, and we fell for each other really fast and really, really hard. But it hit me like a ton of bricks. It hit me like a ton of bricks when I found out that he was married. We were at quarters. It's something called quarters. Quarters is when the division gathers up first thing in the morning or throughout the day to discuss what has to get done. Supervisors would put out to everybody what needs to get done for the day or what still needs to get done, and then we do it again at the end of the day. But our chief, he was going through the spouse information with everybody for them to verify and update their spouse information. And when he turned to him and asked for his spouse information and he started giving it to him, my heart dropped. My heart felt like it just dropped to the floor. I mean, I cried for hours. I went to birthing, and birthing is where we all slept at, and I just laid in my rack. My rack is the bed. I laid in that rack and I cried for hours because of that. After that, I went to this little hangout spot on base, and that was after work, and that's where he found me at. And he was explaining to me that he wasn't happy and that, you know, they were high school sweethearts, but he was planning on divorcing her and all that, you know. I was 20 years old, so I was naive, and yes, I believed it. But trust me when I tell you, that was a drama-filled situation. You guys better believe it. When they say how you get them is how you lose them, that is definitely a thing. And I blame myself for not walking away the day that I found out that he was married. You know, I should have known better. I should have done better. I didn't mean to be a homewrecker, and I have to hold that title because that's just the fact of the matter. You know, but he kept stressing to me that it was over long before I came along, and they were just together for the kids or something like that. Ladies and gentlemen, even if that's the fact, even if you meet somebody and they say that's their situation, please walk away until they are fully and completely single. Trust me, I played myself. I 100% played myself, and it was my fault because I had the choice to walk away and I did not. But I can't really say that I regret the situation, because if it weren't for that connection, my oldest son wouldn't be born. And so of course I don't regret it because my oldest son would not be born. Long story short, he actually did end up divorcing, and we did get married, and we had a kid. So yes, I have to admit, I absolutely loved him at the time. I was head over heels in love with him. I really was. And it was mutual, and we loved each other very, very deeply. But things turned toxic, things turned violent, and I had to let it go. It's like things got so bad at one time that I had to get a protective order, like a restraining order from the Navy, and I had to post it on my door because things got that violent. I was always in some kind of domestic violence counseling, either one-on-one or group counseling. I was always in some kind of domestic violence counseling. So was he, because it was directed by our command. But we actually did have a lot of fun, you know. To be honest, we had a lot of fun, and we had a very passionate connection. There was a lot of passion in that connection. I have to say, I think out of all the relationships that I've been in, I think he and I had the most passion. I have to admit that. Like I said, I can only speak from my perspective, but it was still toxic nonetheless. And let me be very clear, because the toxicity was not just him. It was equal. Both of us was equally responsible for that toxicity, especially on my part, growing up surrounded by a narcissist. It caused me to have narcissistic traits. You know, I don't think I even knew what love was. I'm not even sure if I really knew what I was doing. I was so young. I mean, I knew how I felt, but I also knew that the way that we carried on, that wasn't love, or it was not healthy love, at least. Now, the same way they say all money is not good, all love is not good either. And that's just my take on that. I filed for divorce after 3 years, unfortunately, but as I said, things were so toxic and it was just time for us to part ways. And it was unfortunate because he wasn't in my son's life, and I think that caused me to resent him. You know, his family didn't really connect with my son either, and I think that caused me to resent them as well. And that's not from lack of trying. I did try to connect them, but I don't believe in forcing anybody to be in my child's life. But I did put forth the effort. It was just not reciprocated. And so I think on my part, that caused me to have some resentment towards him and also have some resentment towards them. And I actually let that go at one point towards them. It just seemed pointless to have any kind of resentment towards them. But at the end of the day, I just felt like, you know what? It is what it is, and I just did it on my own. I just raised them by myself. You know, I thought after all those years, it was over like 20 years. I thought I was over that resentment. But when I saw him for the first time at my son's boot camp ceremony, and then again when my son made chief, I felt that resentment again. I felt it full blown. I felt it so much during the chief ceremony that it caused me to have a huge anxiety attack. That felt like an actual panic attack, because in my heart, I felt like he didn't have a right to celebrate with him, you know, because he didn't put the work in to raise him. I'm not going to act like I did everything on my own and just take all the credit, because, you know, there were people in my life who actually gave me some help when it came down to my kids. But overall, I raised that child. No matter how hard times got, I raised that child. And I'm proud of that. You know, I tried my best to raise my son, and even when it came down to telling him the truth, because at a particular time, his sister, which is my first husband's daughter, she wanted to connect with him, and I thought that was a fantastic idea. But I wanted him to walk into that situation knowing the truth, so I had to be honest with him and flat out tell him Mom was a homewrecker. I'll say again, you know, I feel like I deserved everything that I got because of my decisions. Karma was on my back. Karma was on my back for me deciding to move forward after understanding that he was married. That's my fault. So I have to take ownership of that. I can't sit here and try to put that on him. I have to take ownership of that. But my son deserved honesty, and so that's exactly what I gave him. Because young or not, I should have chose better. And he was actually a huge part of my counseling. You know, all the things that we had to go through, all the toxicity, all of the domestic violence that we went through, he was part of my counseling. And it took me a while to heal from that situation. But now I released that resentment. You know, harboring those negative feelings, it does nothing for me except stress me out. So I release it. I'm proud of the job that I did raising my son. And I'm grateful that even though I went through all those traumas, I can still say to myself, well done. And I feel good about that. They're all lessons. Everything we go through is all a lesson. Now, did I learn my lesson completely? Absolutely not. That's incredible. Now that I reflect on it, it's like After all of that I went through, and after going through so much karma was on my heels. I still didn't learn my lesson. I was young. I was making all bad choices. But as we all know, when you don't learn those life lessons completely, you will have to experience karma. I am not exempt from karma. And let's just say, moving into my second marriage, I learned a whole new meaning of the word karma.